Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Well, hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined by Mike Dukart, JJ Dukart, and Dan Coffman. Hey, we're going to be talking about some cool stuff today and a very interesting and somewhat controversial topic, I guess. Aging deer and, how you age a deer, not necessarily from an expert or biological standpoint, but from the fact that experiences that we've had. We're going to show you some different deer here and talk about how hard it really is to get an exact age on a deer without having extensive history of them and what that looks like. So, all of us have tried to age deer, and we talk about mature deer versus immature deer, and it's really hard to know that. But we're going to talk to you about some experiences that we've had with some different deer and kind of what we look for when we're saying, okay, a deer's 3.5 years old versus 4.5 years old.
Yeah, it's one of those topics you just see all the time on social media, and your buddies text you the questions, and I'm guilty of it too. I text everybody, "How old's this deer? How old's this deer?" You send them a picture, and basically you're looking at the rack and trying to figure out how old the deer is that you don't have much history with. Now, we got some examples today that I think are pretty good. They threw a lot of us off when we first saw the antlers. Whether it's the sheds we got on the table here or a couple bucks we got over on the side, the Coffman buck, curly. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting topic that we kind of have our own little side podcasts talking about on the side, and just figured, we might as well record it and put some real life examples out there and just kind of, put some opinion to some of these thoughts. But
yeah, with that being said too, it's one thing to consider is it's every hunter hunts for himself, and I don't know how many years of experience are sitting here and all the people I know, but between all the guys I know that hunt and Mike, I think he's got roughly 50 years of hunting experience or so. Every one of them will admit that they've found themselves on more than one occasion trying to age a deer and finding out later they came up with wrong numbers. So for somebody with 10 years of hunting on to hound another hunter that's got 2 or 3 years of hunting for killing a 3-year-old, kind of step back and think about that before you do that, because, they're hunting for themselves, first of all. What he wants and what you want may be two different things. Another thing is when you really step back and think, and, like I said, you take all them years of experience, how do you expect a guy that's been hunting for 2, 3, 5 years, 6 years, to be able to say, oh, that's a 3-year-old, I'm not going to shoot him, when we know guys with 30 years of experience that will sit there and tell you, aging deer is tough. I mean, there's just too many aspects of it to know that you can be very close to on it, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I'll add to that since you're kind of going down that road. And I think it's still being done today, but back in the day, everything was measured by the rack. Oh, that deer's got to be, and you didn't really talk that much about age, but that's an old buck. He's, and we didn't say, oh, that's a 4-year-old, that's a 6-year-old, that's a 3-year-old, that's a 2-year-old. So everything was looked at by the rack. So that's kind of been the judgment is you look at the rack, it's a big older deer. That's kind of how it's always been done. And that's really not it at all. That's, in fact, the exact opposite of what you should be doing, to be honest with you. If you could, and actually, Dan, we were joking about this a little bit, put a couple photos out on our Deer Society platform and just Photoshop out the rack, say, how old's this buck? Instead of leaving the rack on there. Because that's everybody's instinct. Well, you look at the rack, you look at the body ratio. Oh, that deer's this, and that. Well, it's different. It's different down in Alabama, it's different down in Florida, it's different in Texas, it's different in Minnesota, it's different up in Canada. So you can't look at a rack and realistically say that the age of that deer. And that's kind of, I think, what we're going to kind of talk about a little bit now. And just recently, since we started really getting into this thing, we don't really hunt, and when I say we, it's in general. But us at the Deer Society, and I know for sure JJ and myself And our family, we don't hunt based off of how many inches the deer is. We hunt based off of age. And so that's kind of gone the exact opposite of what the norm has been forever. You know, I'm not saying that we don't look at the rack and say, wow, I want to kill that deer. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we look at the age is the number one thing that we focus on to see whether or not that deer is ready to get on the hit list.
Yeah, so you're taking it from not just a trophy standpoint, an overall management standpoint for betterment of the herd as well. You know, so it's like your goals. I think as a hunter, as all hunters, they're different. But like when I look at you guys and the Whitetails from Scratch property and that kind of thing, you know, it's not a successful year isn't defined by the amount of inches sitting over there. Now, as I look over there, there's a lot of inches sitting over there. But, you know, those are mature deer, and you're shooting those mature deer for a reason. They've had their chance to pass their genetics along to the herd. They're past their, you know, or at their, you know, peak of what's good for, you know, the overall herd and the population. So it's more of a management thing that comes into play there too. You know, I think when we look at age structure of deer, it's almost becoming, and as much as you say it's a recent thing, and I think it is, but, you know, you're almost seeing that now. I feel like as hunters, we have such a problem with, it was score, you know, it was like, okay, well, you got to shoot a 150, you know, or you got to shoot a 170, or you got to shoot all this stuff. And now I feel like people are going to and setting goals for age structure, and that's a really good thing. Like I just talked about, from a management standpoint, from a deer standpoint, like it's a good thing. But now, like, you're starting to see that out there, and it's like, to your point, Dan, it's like, oh, man, he shot a 2-year-old. Or, man, you got to shoot a 5-year-old. You got to shoot a 6-year-old. Like, I feel like just as an overall, and this is kind of a side thing, but overall as a community of hunters, we need to educate. We need to give people knowledge, and that's what the Deer Society does. That's what you guys have been so great at. But then, you know, not criticize or set a bar for anything, whether it's score, whether it's age, whether it's how big a hoof is on a deer. I don't care what it is. But, like, you know, let's educate, and that's what we're going to try to do here, is educate on some things that we see in deer, and to help people understand maybe their deer more. But when it comes down to it, you know, shoot whatever you want to shoot and set your own goals.
Yeah, and you made kind of an interesting point there about, you know, trying to manage based on antlers. I know historically you hear hunt clubs or outfitters, you know, you got to be outside the ears, got to be this wide. So if you take that approach, and just one example, if I look over to my left, Whitetails from Scratch, we shot a 5-year-old buck, a 6-year-old buck, neither of which I think are wider than, you know, 14-inch inside spread. So you take two of the oldest bucks, and if you're following this, you know, it's got to be outside the ears. You just, you know, you basically, you're passing up your most mature buck. You can't even hit that standard based on rack size. So management practice based on antlers it's just not the best way to go about that.
I want to add something to the age thing. I don't want people to think that, you know, that the age is like, oh, you shot a 2-year-old, you shouldn't shoot that 2-year-old, because you're right. We don't think that way at all. The reason we go by age, and I'm going to say me personally, now I don't know if it's everybody, but the reason I go by age, and I know JJ's the same way, is the challenge. What people don't, I think, and many people do, but what a lot of people don't realize is the challenge of the sport is what the satisfaction, the fulfillment comes from the challenge of the sport. I mean, if you go out there and I'm going to shoot every single deer, boom, 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 boom. Well, you know, brag that I shot 12 deer. You're at some point in time, you're going to burn out. You know what I mean? It's like, well, this ain't even fun anymore. You know what I mean? Because there's no challenge to it. That's what the pure essence of hunting is for myself, I know, and for JJ. And if you look at the behavior of the deer, which is what I've studied for decades, by the way. That's why this company was built, because I study behavior of animals. That's what this company was founded on. And so I'll give you an example. When I first started turkey hunting, the big thing was to figure out how to communicate with them, bring them in, get them in close, and shoot them. And I got really good at it. And then it's like, well, I need something new. I'm going to shoot one with a bow. So I buy myself a brand new shotgun that year for waterfowl, and I decided to get a bow for a turkey. So I get out there, I do my stuff, everything, struggling. It was just a tough year. So I took my gun out on the very last day of the season, called this bird in within, I don't know, maybe 2 yards. I'm sitting on a fence post in the open, and he's strutting there right next to me, and I couldn't move the gun or anything like that. You know, the turkey was so close. Anyway, make a long story short, he turned his back to me. I turned around, shot him with my brand new shotgun, and blew his entire head off completely. And, you know, it was hanging by a thread. And I know this is kind of gross sounding, but after I shot that turkey, I felt like a dissatisfaction of like, that was just so overkill. It was just so much. And I wanted to kill that bird with my bow. And if I would have brought my bow, I would have easily killed that bird. So my point is, it becomes a challenge at some point that fulfills you. And that's what age structure of deer does for, I know, me and for JJ. You know, racks are definitely a big part of this, you know, in scoring. I'm not saying it's not. But it really is about the challenge, and the age structure is the challenge because the behavior of that deer changes so dramatically once you get from 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years. And you would think, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, you would think it would be, okay, so they're young, they're dumb, and that's pretty much the case. They're young, they're dumb, then they get to 4, and they're getting tougher to shoot. You know, the average guy, they're going to get a better survival rate once they hit 4, wouldn't you say, JJ? They start getting smart. By 5, they are smart. By 6, they'll kick your butt all day long. And by 7, it's just like, oh my God, if I can get one look or one chance at this deer, I mean, it'd be like the biggest deal in the world for you, you know, in the history of your hunting. But by the time they get 8, then they go back to, you know what? I am king of the freaking castle here. And they start showing themselves again. So I'm going to say they don't get dumb when they get super old, but they get more bold. So that's a behavior thing. You know, I just wanted to throw the age structure. That's my take on age. It's not it's a challenge. It's a fulfillment.
I think on that subject too is I'm sure, like you said, you nailed it. That's a fulfillment for you. You're hunting for yourself,
Right.
In your family and the fun of it, and that's what everybody should look at. You don't have nothing to prove to anybody. I mean, I've spent years thinking I did, and you know, I finally had the opportunity to kill something that I'll never kill again, and people dream of killing. And that was what it took for me to realize that I have nothing to prove to anybody else. Like, obviously, I want people to think highly of me. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, I hunt for me. I go to work every day to pay for me to hunt, for me to enjoy it. And being worried about what somebody else thinks is just astronomical to me. We need to hunt for ourselves. And, you know, I'm guessing for Mike, that came with years of hunting that you got to that point. When you first started hunting, it wasn't about age. It was about killing a big buck. It was about
just getting a deer.
Yeah.
And I see that, and that goes back to the point that you made, you know, that we don't judge people for what they're shooting, because we'll have, well, here's a good example. We're managing a piece of property. Somebody has a piece of property next to us. They say they want to manage with us, but they shoot 5 deer under the year of 3.5, you know, in like 2 seasons. Well, you want to say, well, you're not managing, you know, it could upset some people, but it's disappointing that you lose some of that, but really they don't know any different and they got to go through it. And now it's starting to happen, you know, because they shot one deer that was bigger now, and now they kind of realize it. And last year they watched 4 or 5 deer go by, didn't even take a shot. And so that, you know, that doesn't mean they're getting better hunters. It just means they're becoming more mature, and it's taking them, once again, they're getting more fulfillment out of, you know, taking that next age class. They're learning from us is what they're doing too, you know.
And I guess like I said, I want people to realize that, like, don't base your goals in life and don't base what you want around us or somebody with 50 years experience or somebody with 30 years experience. Base around what you want and what makes you happy, because the truth is, I've got probably over 20, we got over 20 bucks on our wall at home. And I would go to say, wow, there's a lot of deer on my wall when I look at it that are 3.5-year-old deer between 135 to 150. And let me tell you something, I'm just as proud as them deer. Back then, I didn't care about age structure. I just wanted to get my experience. I wanted to hunt and kill deer and the fun of it and have fun. And yeah, I was looking for antler size. It finally one day dawned on me is when I was managing land, and said, I want, I'm a little different than Mike in the aspect of age is huge for me. I don't believe in a call buck, at least where I live in Ohio. I believe where I live in Ohio, you can't really start down in genetics until you know they have every nutrition and mineral and everything that they need. And you never really know that. And I've seen so many times, and this buck right here that JJ has is a prime example. This deer was 4. He ended up killing it when it was 8. And if you look at the deer when it was 8, like looking at that deer at 4, you would think, now he ain't ever going to be much. And yeah, he didn't turn 200 inches, but what'd you say? He was just under, he's almost 170 inches.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that took 4 years for that deer to get that to 170 inches. A lot of people at 7-year-old might think, well, that's a call buck, I'm going to get rid of it. Well, I'll tell you what, if you're at the point where you're not happy with the deer getting 170 inches, man, I want you to come and teach me some stuff.
I'll tell you what, you go chase that deer.
He's tough.
4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. He will kick your butt. And, and you get that satisfaction. But when you kill that, that's probably, JJ's killed deer that has scored better than that. But I'm not going to put it, words in your mouth. But based on his reaction, it seemed like it was the most fulfilling thing he's ever done since he's been hunting.
And I think
Maybe I'm wrong on that, but
I think that's what makes that is now you're not only are you talking about age structure and the management aspect of it, but when you're hunting a deer that's older, you have history with them. And that history becomes more important to you in the whole aspect of things. How excited do we get when we're filming and I come to you with footage and say, I got 3 years of experience and pictures and video of this deer. You guys are ecstatic. It's because that experience and knowing that deer for 2 or 3 years becomes a personal thing that it makes you that much more excited about that deer.
And sheds
Yes.
and behavior and patterns, and you can go on and on and on.
Absolutely. And the Coffman buck, just to give everybody an example for aging. So when you get down on yourself because you think you aged a deer wrong, well, I have all the respect in the world for our ODNR in Ohio. I mean, they're great. They're awesome. We sent my jaw to ODNR. Now, the only way they say to truly, and I'm not a scientist, biologist, nothing, but they say the only way to truly know a deer's age is one of its molars you cut out and they cut it in half and count the rings or something like that. Now, I never did that with the Coffman buck. I should eventually, just so I know for a fact. We guessed he was 7.5 to 8 years old by history of that other people and I had with him, and obviously his size. When ODNR sent the jaw back to me, they guessed him at 3.5. Just the jaw. Now, they didn't know what deer it was. Now, we know this deer had 200 inches and more sitting on his head for 3 years straight, so I hardly doubt he was 3, and if he is, he probably killed his mom coming out, I mean, so we know this deer is 7, but that goes to show, and if you really truly start to thinking about it, if that deer has the genetics to grow those antlers, which are bone, what's to say he doesn't have the genetics to have teeth that are great? I mean, we know people that eat healthy and don't eat sugars and brush their teeth every day that have to get their teeth repaired all the time. And we know guys that, smoke dip, don't take care of themselves and never have a cavity. So, I mean, genetics plays a huge role in it. And it's hard, it's hard to start judging based on things like that because you just can't. I mean, I think it's practically impossible to, you can get close with history.
So let's get right into the age piece of it.
Yeah, I want to throw this over to JJ, but I just want to say, damn, almost a 300-inch buck. It's a good thing nobody's judging against you because that's some serious stuff. But anyways, let's get into it. So JJ, what do you look for? You see a buck on the hoof. Like, what are you looking at? When you're thinking, okay, how old is he? Is he 2? Is he 3? Is he 4? Like, what are those features that you're looking at?
Yeah, I'll just say quick that we run so many cameras, it's ridiculous. And running them on video mode, we get to see some things that photos don't show us, and you just learn so much from interaction. I mean, me and Dan were going through videos yesterday, even learning even more. But most deer, and I'm looking at a few here, never get to the age to where you actually see what the potential is. I would say 99% of the deer never get to full.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And even you just think about some of the buck. I mean, was Dan's 300? Is that the maximum potential? I don't know. You
Who
never know.
knows? You don't.
You know, shot Curly at what we believe 6.5. He's a 180-inch buck. Was that maximum potential? No idea. Beamer, same thing. It's almost like you never know what really was going to come in the deer. But most deer get shot in that 2-3 year old range. And just looking at some of the sheds we have on on the table here, there's one that just stands out that we've all been looking at, you know, the videos of it and try to grab.
And shaking our heads as we look at it.
And I know some people are not watching this, but you can go YouTube and actually see the video of it. But this deer right here, from what I believe, based on just trail cameras, what do you think, Dan?
I won't lie. I have a different opinion now that I've seen the information that JJ has, but when he showed it to me initially, I would have guessed at minimum that's a 5-year-old deer, if not 6 maybe. I'd have been hard pressed to believe that it was 4, but I could believe it. But anything less than that,
Well,
sure as
there's
heck
even
wouldn't believe.
argument on a deer like that. A guy could look at that and look at the mash. You could say, well, that's a deer on his way down, so that what structure does that put it at? But if you take away some of the base, but you can't always go by the base either,
Yeah, but based on 2 years of just trail camera video, I've never seen him in person. I believe he's got a good chance that this is a 3-year-old buck, and that sounds like pretty crazy. There's a chance he's 4 too. There's very, 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 very little chance he's older than that based on just the videos of him. I mean, the amount he's grown, the body size. But there's also another factor with him, to where he's also like a foot taller than the other deer too. So it just goes back to genetics. Like, why are some people in the NBA and why are other people, golfers that are 150 pounds soaking wet and on the PGA? I mean, it's just completely different genetic makeups of people, and it's the same thing with deer. This deer right here, call him Andre the Giant.
Some guys are
he is-
5'7" and
Tell 'em the
200 pounds,
story.
so they decided just to bow hunt.
Well, I think we're kind of understating this deer a little bit here
It's hard to
because
describe it.
he's seen this deer and he's known this deer, and all of a sudden the photos clicked. And tell him how that happened.
Yeah, and we need to break this down and really show the visual on some social posts, or hopefully on a hunt breakdown is really where it
Wish
would
we had
come
a
into play.
tape.
But
At some point in time.
if you could superimpose a couple of trail camera videos of known 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds hitting the scrape, and then this buck I call Andre the Giant hitting the same scrape, and he just absolutely towers over deer that I'm very confident are 4 years old, just from a body standpoint.
His back was at least
He's in the next branch up from all other deer that are hitting the licking branch. So it's just
standing
this
in the exact same
wild
spot. Yep.
outlier.
I'd say he's the tallest deer that you showed me by, what would you say, 6 inches?
At
Yeah.
least,
At the
yeah.
back?
I would
At the
say.
back.
I mean, the biggest deer, the next biggest size deer is at least 6 inches smaller, shorter than this deer. And then you go on to even look at the younger deer that are 12 inches shorter.
Once you actually look at it and realize what you're looking at, you're going, "Oh my God!"
It's a weird phenomenon. That's for
He
sure.
is just such a big body deer.
See, so yeah, you see and it goes the other way too. So you have these deer that have these massive, antlers and big bases, and you try to put a guess on the age, and then, I know Brian, you got a good example, or I even got one here with Beamer at 4, but you picked up some sheds this year that from a 5-year-old that you showed me, and I obviously just saw photos, not the sheds in real life, but I thought, man, it looks like a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's so hard to tell, and there's a few things to touch on here. The interesting thing about this, let's touch on this deer first. So, like, you pick up this shed right here, not knowing anything about this deer. You're like, okay, he's 4 years old for sure, probably older, potentially. Like, I don't pick up this shed anywhere and say, okay, he's 3 years old. Now, you go back and look at the trail camera history that you have. Very plausible that he's 3.5 years old. You can have the other side of it. The interesting thing about this deer, though, is as much as he's bigger bodied, you know, we talk about his big body and being so tall. When you look at a deer, and I want to talk about this, is like there's certain variables that or certain aspects that you look at to determine what might be his age, right? It's not just his rack. It's not just his body size. It's not just his belly or sway back. I like to look a lot at their face, you know, because I think deer are, in a sense, a lot like humans. And Dan, you said it yesterday. You do have those humans that may be old, but they look young, and you have young ones that look old. So there's definitely outliers here. But from a standpoint of like when I look at a 5-year-old deer, he looks different in the face than a 3-year-old deer, right? This deer, he's got a big body, but he doesn't have those. He's got a tall body. He doesn't have those other characteristics.
No.
You look at that deer in the face, he doesn't look like he's 5 years old. He looks like he's 3 years old. You look at the definition of his body and his muscle structure. Yeah, it's big, but he doesn't have that 5-year-old look. So it's super crazy. Now, we picked up a shed.
But you don't know he's big unless you compare him to another deer.
Correct. Yep.
He looks, his ratio is exactly what you're saying. If you didn't know he was that tall, would just go, yeah, that's 3-year-old. That's a nice one.
Yep. So then you have a deer like this other one that JJ just mentioned. So we found in Minnesota, picked up a shed. I showed him pictures. Like, it's nothing special. I know that deer's 5 years old because we have trail camera pictures of him. He's been hit twice. Like, we know the deer because we have the history with him. We pick up a shed. His base is smaller than that. He doesn't have near the mass. Completely different. You pick up that shed and hold his rack. You'd never say he was 5 years old, but I know for a fact he is.
So can I ask you something real quick? Because we were talking about this yesterday. You said you know that deer's 5 years old. Now here's my question to you. When you say I know that deer's 5 years old, would you say it's a safe bet to say, because at least I do this. Let's face the facts. We probably didn't know the deer by trail camera at 1. We didn't recognize him.
No.
2,
It's at
maybe
2.5.
we did, maybe we didn't. 3, we probably did. So then we're calling him 5. So we're truly estimating a year or two there
For sure.
that we didn't really know him. So when you say 5, would you agree that you're saying 5, assuming that he could probably be anywhere from 4 at the earliest to 5.5, maybe 6 at the latest, right?
Well,
give or take a
yes.
year.
I think what we do, and JJ's the master at this in between our little core group here in the family, is you identify him at 2.5. You can identify the deer not just by the antlers. You
Absolutely.
can identify the deer by the throat patch. You can identify him by
Cut
different
ears.
features, a lot of different things. So JJ studies that stuff, and they will get the characteristic of their natural form of their rack at 2.5. And so that's where you start to pick up on it between body characteristics, different, whitenesses, different face like you're talking about. And then that's your starting point. So I don't think you're really missing by a year at the most, to be honest with you.
Yeah, on certain deer, I think that's the case. Like this deer, for example, we called him Lumpy. He had a distinguishable lump on his front shoulder. He's always
that
had it.
makes
So,
sense,
so we
yeah.
distinguished that when he was 2 years old. Now,
That takes a lot of studying, though, to be able to get there.
yeah.
you know?
So could we have made the mistake? When he was 2, could he have been 3? Sure, that happens a lot. I think that you can make that mistake. Are there certain deer that you call a 2-year-old that are maybe only 1.5? Maybe, right? So there's definitely differences there. I think there are a few deer that you could start to recognize special deer, with really
Absolutely,
good genetics
yeah.
that you could recognize at that 1.5 and then carry through, till. So I say 5.5. I'm fairly confident in that, but yeah, could it be off a year? Absolutely. But to the point, like, you wouldn't say that deer is, by just holding his antlers, you see him come in on a trail camera and you put your finger over his body and you look at his rack, you're not going to say he's 5.5. You do the opposite. Put your hand over his rack and you look at his body, you're going to say, well, that's a mature deer. Not knowing him, you're not going to say he's 5.5, but you look at his face, you look at his sway back, you look at his belly. So there's so many differences. Like, you can't just tell by its rack and you can't just tell by its body. And that's why we're talking about this. We're not, we're talking about experiences that we have, but we're not going to tell you, look, these are the things you have to look at to say a deer is 5.5 or 6.5 or 2.5, because you can't do it. Unless you go and you send in the molar or whatever else, it's almost impossible to tell without having that history.
But I think you can get within a year if you understand these aspects that we're talking about. And JJ you're being way too quiet. So tell me exactly.
Well, I was just going to say, me and Dan yesterday were trading a bunch of trail camera pictures. I was showing you, a bunch of the deer in Minnesota, Wisconsin. You say you have a hard time
Your
aging
deer are
or
way bigger
even
than
scoring
ours,
our deer because the
body-wise.
bodies are just way bigger. And then I was looking at a lot of your pictures yesterday thinking, are these deer just gigantic or are the bodies a little bit smaller to where the racks maybe look a little bit large? I don't know. I can't tell.
Well, my
'cause it's
antlers
just
are
weird.
usually bigger than yours.
I
But I mean,
I don't know how you don't shoot a 190 every year. I mean, I'm just kidding. No, but it was just,
but you're right. It's very hard. It's no
So the-
different. You go to the extreme from Florida to Minnesota. I mean, the body sizes are just.
But you're still going to get those those
Yes.
characteristics, and that's kind of where I wanted to lead you with and Brian touched on it with the back and the belly and the back quarters and the head.
and it's
Give us some
it's
detail.
just weird because I look at the Beamer buck. He was 8 years old. He was extremely short, I'd call him a midget. He'd go up to a scrape and way shorter, but fat. Back had the swelled, big gut, like neck. Basically, like when he was rutted
No
up,
neck. He was
there
a
were some
wedge.
photos that we shared on the Hunt Breakdown. You couldn't see the difference between his chest and his neck. I mean, in his chin, it just tapered in one solid form. Didn't even really have a neck. So just like this neck is really a big one. I mean, we're looking at a buck this year that was 7, and every time I see him, even after he shed, you could just see, like we talk about his face too, these big eyes and dark forehead, and Dan talks about the dark tarsals all the time on these old bucks. They stayed, staying throughout the whole fall, winter,
That's the one thing that I've noticed
and that's big too.
that I can truly look at a deer and seem to get a better idea if I think like I can't really tell, and I'm like, man, is that buck? Because like you were saying, like you said, his neck. The one thing we got to keep into consideration too is there's a couple different issues here. One thing is, are we talking neck in the summer? Are we talking neck during the rut? Are we talking neck late season when he's beefed up too, after he's broke down and built back up? Because all three of them things can really change your attitude on how that deer looks. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on before we go too far, and I think the more we've been talking, I think we take it for granted that everybody knows this, but what if we were to kind of hit a little bit on the difference of we take for granted, do people understand why when we say 3 or 3.5, the fact that these bucks can be born late from a doe that got bred late, or maybe she cycled back in February. That if a buck's born late, his first antler year, maybe he's very young when he has it and he only has spikes. Whereas if that buck was born 6 months prior and he had a little bit of age under him before he grew that first rack, well, now his rack may be this, and it might be his first year rack. So I guess when you talk about a half a year, it can make a big difference between that first rack, which could fool you into thinking it's 2 or 1.
I think that half a year to that year misjudgment, I think is something that I think we're all comfortable with.
Well, I was saying for viewers as far as
Yeah. And I'm just trying to throw out more information so they can visually see this. So like when we're, and I want, once again, I'm still pointing at you because you're not giving me what I'm looking for, JJ, is what do you look for telling you that it's a 2-year-old from the body? Be specific. And then say, what do you look for from a 3-year-old specific? And just kind of walk it up a little bit to help our listeners.
Yeah, and that's where there's always that little bit of a gray year area too, even body, looking at bodies. But I mean, a 2-3-year-old buck, 3, sometimes you can get some plump bucks that actually look 4. They're real beefy, but 2 seems like a doe, big lank, kind of a lanky doe looking body.
Lanky doe, the neck is kind of like a giraffe kind of long.
Yeah, no
skinny,
gut. I mean,
no belly.
chest tapers right up into the
Back is
hind
pretty
end.
much straight.
Back straight. Same thing with 3. They start to get a little bit of a gut.
And then the back corner, you don't see any round ball in that back corner. Where that back quarter starts to really build up muscle, you'll see a distinctive line and a ball starting to develop in your older bucks.
Yeah, and I mean, just there's generalizations you can kind of make on both body and antlers that put you in that ballpark. But again, the more we talk to each other, the more we see these big bucks shot, and the more we see the outliers like we're looking at here, just the main the main point is you just never really know.
And then also once you identify that buck based off of his core structure of his rack at, let's say, at 2.5 years old, and now you can kind of follow the characteristics and say that's the same deer, along with maybe the style or the size of the throat patch or something about that deer, and you put 2 and 2 together, and then boom, now you got that deer named, okay? And now you know that deer. And so when you see that deer, and so like when they make their big jumps, like my opinion is 5.5 is kind of the turning point. And when they hit 5.5, they can make massive jumps. But then again, once it goes back to the genetics, because we looked at a 3.5-year-old deer was taken this year, and we wanted him to live because he was going to turn into we think he could be a 200-inch deer, and that's this rack right here. This is him.
What we believe is 2.
What we believe is him. This was 2.5 years old, correct?
Could be 3, but yeah.
Could be 3, but
Guessing
but
2.
we had him at 2.5 here. This is a genetic that we have at the place. And he hit 3.5, and he really got significant and started to get the frame and everything else. And we're like, oh my God, that deer at 6.5, that could be our 200-inch deer. Well, someone ended up harvesting him, and you can't blame him. It was his first buck. It was a beautiful rack and blah, 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 blah. Nobody's judging anybody, but that just goes to show you, you can't go by the rack. Oh yeah, let's compare this 2.5 to a 4.5 right here. There's more inches here on the 2.5.
But we've also talked about how that deer with our scoring system, he doesn't get the mass.
This thing weighs probably, oh my God, 5 times more than this rack because of the mass. I'd like to go put it on the scale, but I know it's significantly more.
Going back to this rack, did you guys have a rack the year before?
No, that would put him at 1.5.
1, and I believe I had
Yeah.
a picture, but there's no.
You just
way
don't
to-
have
There's no way you can
So-
really tell that 1.5, which is a good point.
Then my question I'm asking you is okay, so we assume, okay, this deer's 2.5, and it makes perfect sense. But obviously, from my standpoint, I'm looking at the brows, and I'm like, oh, gosh.
I know.
That's big brows for 2.5. So I guess my question to you guys is, what are the things you looked at on that deer that brought you to 2.5?
Well, I'm looking at it, and you just look at the beam itself, and there's nothing to it. And you look at the base, and there's nothing to it.
No mass.
And so it tells me it's just a...
Yeah, biggest thing.
But I'm sure you looked
Outside
at
of-
the body,
and
too.
the
I'm
body,
talking
yeah,
body.
we knew the body was.
Yeah,
we
so what
watched
was the body? What parts of the body did you
outside
look
of-
at to come at 2?
Looking at Antler, he hung out with another buck that was kind of your standard
2.5-year-old.
2-year-old
Okay,
buck.
Standard 2, and then
Makes
They
they-
would
sense.
spar, and that was kind of the same thing we did with Skyscraper a while back. Like, is he 2 or is he 3? That rack up on the wall. And, you start seeing them, sparring with other bucks, just walking past each other, interacting. You start to see, like, the hierarchy and
Yep.
So
you know,
then
just
that makes me-
comparing
Then
them.
you can
That
tell,
then gives you a
right.
little bit more information, but you
You
still
can tell.
never fully
You can
know.
tell socially in their groups who they're hanging around with, what's going on. Yeah, and you can see a 3.5 and say, well, that guy's. We know he's 3.5, so he's 2.5.
And then when they
you know.
neighbor shot him, him and the guy that helped him recover, they're like, yeah, that was, everything you'd
And that's something
think about
I've-
in a 3-year-old is what he probably would. And it could have been 4 still, but they thought, wow, he looks young. 3.
But what
That's-
a beautiful rack.
Yeah, 100.
That's something I've never actually taken into consideration. Now you got me thinking about it. Is so obviously we're all here to learn too. When you look at these 2 racks, okay, and from your guys' experience, and it sounds like you're on top of it. You're looking at this deer 2.5, and you're looking at this deer 4.5. So then that brings me to something to think that, okay, so if I'm looking at this deer and I'm saying, I think he might be 4.5. Hey, maybe he's 3, whatever. That's another thing that I've never considered is what's he hanging out with? Because what age would you guys agree that somewhere between that 4.5 to 5.5 is when a buck decides I'm done hanging out with other bucks and I want to be on my own? So if this buck right here, if I'm trying to decide whether he's 4 or 5 and he's in a bachelor group, I'm safer to say, you know what, he's probably closer to 4 than 5. Because if he was 5, he'd probably be off by himself. Now, we also know that every deer has different personalities, so that can change it too.
and also the time of the year has something to do with it too, because they do bachelor up.
Absolutely,
so you got to
yes.
take a look at that. But I would say that you were dead on with a 3.5 will more than tolerate hanging around with other bucks in that 2.5, and they'll get a little more competitive with their own 3.5 guys at that point in time. But at 4.5, they're making a statement. They're making a statement, and they're not hanging around with them little guys. They're not sparring with them. They're not doing that. They're angry. They got too much hormone. They got too much competitive spirit to really want to breed. You know, where your 3.5, I would say, is just your ridiculous, or your 2.5s are just stupid, running around, don't know what's going on, kind of like a Jake.
It's funny
You know?
to think of that too, because I know 2 properties right now that I can think of that in the last couple of years where I had 2 deer on them that hung out a lot together. I seen them on the property a lot together. They were both there all the time, and all of a sudden, I think they were right around the same age, and one was there more often, and the other one wasn't. He was gone most of the time. So my guess is both them deer became mature and said, "I'm done dealing with you.
Yeah.
I'm going my own direction." Somebody else on the 2 properties over or a property over has that buck more randomly now. So that goes to show you that when you have that property, you know, that, man, it just seems like all I got's a bunch of little bucks this year, you know? You never know when that could all change like that. And that 5-year-old and that 5-year-old say, "We ain't hanging out together." And who knows? The 5-year-old that's 170 versus the 5-year-old that's 145 might say, "Well, this is my property. I'm staying here. And I may lose the 170. You may be getting my 170.
Well, let's add a forget the number. Let's add a 7 or 8.5-year-old buck to the scenario. Okay, you won't even see him. You don't even know he's there.
No,
You'll
unless
see
you're running a lot of
normal
cameras.
buck behavior, and even 6.5 can be that way, but 7, 8, you'll see normal buck behavior on your property. You won't think anything's different, and there could easily be a 7, 8.5-year-old deer living there, and you'll never see him. You'll never even see him unless you got trail camera or something like that. But visually, you'll have no idea that deer's there.
Even
Or he may
trail
decide he's going to
cameras.
come 2 miles away and go look for other does, and all of a sudden, boom, he's on your property.
Even trail cameras, them 3-year-olds will walk by that camera 10 times in 3 weeks, and that 6-year-old will walk by it 1 time in 3 weeks.
Well, we watched it where deer would consistently show up on our camera spots, and then all of a sudden they get wise to it, and they just don't want to be seen on the camera anymore.
And I don't know. if
Curly
it's-
was one of those
They're just
deer.
good at detecting
Gone for a whole year.
human. I mean, that's it.
So let's talk about Curly for a second. I'm going to pull his rack up here, and I'm going to let you hold him. So, you know, it's interesting because we talk about what makes this deer a 2-year-old, right? You look at the base, and you look at this beam and whatever else. Now you look at Curly. Curly is a 180-inch typical 10-pointer, basically, right? I look at Curly, and it's super interesting because I think he is on the other side of the spectrum. Like, Curly is how old? You believe when you shot him.
6.5, we believe.
Okay, 6.5. Curly is a giant deer. But Curly is not your stereotypical, I don't think, 6.5-year-old deer. He doesn't look like that. So he's on the other end of the spectrum. Like, his bases aren't significantly big. His mass is not significant whatsoever. Now, I think it's dwarfed a little bit because his tines are so long and he's so just massively framed. You had an encounter with a deer that was similar to this last year. Now, not the same, but like in the sense of like he's not your massive, like you look at these 2 deer together, if you just looked at the rack, I don't know, you'd have a hard time saying maybe which one is older by just looking at his rack. Now,
I agree with that.
again, Curly is an exception on the other side of things. So like we think of mass, we think of this beefy, big base, like gnarly thing. Well, Curly's 6.5 years. And again, we speak from experience up here in Minnesota, the Midwest area, right? I'm sure it's different in Texas or in different places in the world. But like, I look at Curly and I'm like, man, giant deer. But then you look at him and you're like, man, and I don't want to say thin horn. I don't mean to like degrade him at all because he's an absolute monster. But I'm just saying from an overall standpoint, it's just interesting to look at the differences of what a 6.5-year-old deer can look like being this way, and then what a 3-year-old can look like being this way, and what a 6.5-year-old over there, skyscraper, looks like, and it's all different, like you always want to say, wow, big bases, he's got to be old. that shed proves that wrong.
That it proves it wrong. I'm going to add something real quick, and I'll throw it right back at you. But look at the base, okay, and look at the base on Curly. You see how those knobs are starting to come out of there, and all them little stickers and everything. That tends to be a sign of age when they get more of that. But that it could be a sign of genetics too. But it does around here anyway. It tends to be when you start getting a bunch of them stickers coming out of the bases and stuff. You're probably at age. Now look at that one we think is 4.5, smooth, relatively. And I just wanted to throw that out there. And we did have to let Curly go at 4 because he got broke up so dang bad. There was nothing left of him. And at 5, he even got broke up.
We talk about letting go as in we passed, but really
I was
we
gonna
saw
say
him
that,
close.
yes.
We saw him.
We
We filmed
filmed
him. You know,
close.
we let him go,
Yeah,
but
we
we
let him
didn't
go.
really let
When
him
we
go.
kill 7, 8-year-old deer,
JJ, you're being too honest.
9 times out of 10, it really is not because he's getting a pass this year. A lot of times, for me at least, it's no. I would have killed him at 6 if he'd have let me. I couldn't get him, and he got it to 7. Good. I'm glad because it made it better for me.
Yeah, I've said it before. If you were too efficient, you'd kill them all when they're 4 and 5, and they would never get massive like Beamer. So in some ways, it's good to not always be the best.
You only, I guarantee you. I mean, not guarantee, but nothing's a guarantee. But when they get 6, you don't get chances at them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you get them because you really, really worked hard on that deer.
I've learned on properties too, you got to be really careful about letting too many does get to 6 and not taking does, because I've had a couple properties where I let that happen, and next thing I know, wasn't killing anything, because every time I turned around, there was a mature doe that was 6 or 7 years old blowing at me or figuring me out before I had the opportunity. You got to get past them 9 times out of 10 before you get to him.
You go ahead.
When
Brian.
did you start getting trail camera? Like what year did you start getting trail camera pictures? of
Well,
this
we
deer?
thought we had him at 3, Curly, which would be 3 years before I shot him. I don't know if it was fully him, if it was truly him or not. It was one picture, one time. But then a lot of history at what we believe was 4. I mean, huge
Right.
body. Like if you didn't see his rack, you'd say, oh, he's at least 4. I can't put him at 3. No way. Still thin rack though. But yeah, I mean, just a big horse-looking deer, fully mature. So I mean, there's always been in the back of my mind, like, was he 7? Rack always, when I look at him, I'm like, God, there's just no way he's got no mass. But I mean, you don't know. We're putting him at 6.5, but again, it's that 1 year
With
on
that
either
year
side.
cushion. Yep.
But kind of this whole podcast came from a topic that we were kind of discussing last week. One of the guys we know made a post online about finding sheds and aging a deer, which was really young. And to that post, the person that found him is going to know better than anyone. I could say this is 3, this is 2, and people can call me BS all they want. We don't know. Nobody fully knows, but the person that finds them has the most history. That's, the benchmark you got to go with, because everybody looking at social media has no idea because you have no history with the deer in the area. So you got to just go with what was, posted or said. And if you got a different opinion, that's fine. Everybody's basically has an opinion at that
Everybody's
point. 'cause
entitled to it.
But everything that we just pointed out here with the actual physics of these sheds and these antlers proves your point. It proves it. There's no way anybody could, by looking at a picture and not knowing anything about that deer, say that they think this is deer and be more accurate than the person who has history and has that rack in their hands. It's just not possible.
So with that being said, just something to think about. I got to be honest, sitting here looking at these, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I usually have anywhere from 8 to 10 properties. Now, one thing you got to keep in mind is, I'm not sure what you guys are running. I'm running over 60 trail cameras on 8 to 10 properties, and we are allowed to feed in Ohio. We're allowed to run mineral. Therefore, a lot of my cameras are going off a lot. I want to say I'm over 100,000 pictures a year is what I'm downloading on my computer. Like sometimes like upwards of 140,000 pictures a year. So I'm not near as good as it sounds JJ is at truly taking deer from a young age. I really don't start paying a lot of attention to them until they get to that 3.5, probably 4.5 years old. So therefore, I don't know the age structure on my deer like you do. But what I can say is this: I don't feel like I see this. I don't feel like I see what is
Outliers.
such a great difference.
These
in
are
genetics on
outliers to
properties.
be,
like
transparent.
like most of my deer, and I believe this, where I live in Ohio, and I would almost go to say anywhere in Ohio, for somebody to say my property does not have the genetics, and keep in mind, this is strictly my opinion on it. From what I've seen over the years in Ohio, with feeding, nutrition, being in the crop belt and everything, I'm hard pressed to believe that anybody can call it genetics in Ohio. I feel that 90-something% of the deer in Ohio, if given the right nutrition and the right age structure, could very easily be bucks that easily clear every single one. 90% of them would clear 160s to 170s at 7, 8 years old if given right nutrition. I'm saying, what I'm saying is,
Now, if you're watching this, we got these massive antlers sitting right in front
genetics,
of Dan.
I don't feel plays a huge role in Ohio. I really don't. And I think a lot of it has to do with the flatlands, the soil, the
nutrition.
belt, the
You guys
nutrition. You guys have
add
harsher
a lot of-
winters. Your deer have to focus more on putting meat on their bones. Where our deer have
They gotta
lighter
have the
winters.
muscle.
Yes, they have to have the muscle and the fat. The other thing too is, I'm curious to know, and I would love, it would be cool if me and you both did this. Go back, and I have every single trail camera I've ever taken since like 2012, I think, on my hard drive. Someday I want to sit down and truly start pulling the deer and actually looking at them, what they grew every single year. Because there's a couple things that I've thought it over and over and over again. One is, I feel that a deer is a lot like a child or a dog when we watch other animals grow. A child, they usually grow tall and lanky one year, and then the next year they fill out and they start getting muscle and build up. Like a dog, it looks tall and lanky and then it fills out, and then the next year their bones grow and they get tall and lanky again and then they fill out. Well, I almost feel deer the same way. I feel like Mike said it earlier. He nailed it. He said that 5 to 6 is when they take the massive jump. And I feel like for years, what I would do is focus on these deer and I would think, okay, well, he just took a 30-inch jump. So that tells me he's probably 4, because that 3 to 4 is the big jump everybody talks about, right? But in reality, I feel like, at least in Ohio, when you're wanting to truly hunt those 170s, 180s, the monsters, that 3 to 4 jump ain't what you're looking for. So I think that what happens is 1 and 2, it's hard to say because, they're just tiny, they're small, but they hit that 3, and that 3.5-year-old buck is really the buck that starts looking like a mature, like a big body.
Yeah, that's when you start kind of focusing on their age.
Yep. And then when they hit that 3 to 4, I feel like their body doesn't blow up as much, but that's when you get the huge antler jump, which makes sense because they didn't put as much energy into their body that year. Well, then you got the 4 to 5. The difference between that 4-year-old to that 5-year-old body is usually a pretty good indicator. You can see, he puts a lot more body size on, but that is where I think I messed up for years, is that 4 to 5, he put all that body size on, and he only put 8 to 10 inches on. And I said, he's done. But then what happened is what I found out through accident, because he wouldn't let me kill him, I had several deer that hit 6, and I realized, wow, that deer just put another 30, 40-inch jump on. That 5 to 6 jump, I feel, is what we truly want.
There's no doubt about it, But they don't all do that.
Right. So I got to comment on that.
Yep.
And this is big for location, Ohio versus Minnesota. So I just think of the Whitetails from Scratch property, looking at the 2 deer we shot at 5 and 6 last year. Both deer made, one deer, Skyscraper specifically, from 3 to 4. I think he only jumped an inch or 2. It was a bad jump.
Bad jump, yeah.
I don't know why. There are many factors.
So that's 3 to 4, but are you saying that it could possibly be
I don't know. It's just a small
2 to
sample
3,
size.
2.5 to 3.5, or 3.5 to 4.5?
So the 2 to 3s on both of those deer were big jumps. 3 to 4 were very minimal. 4 to 5 were the big second jump.
Every other year for both deer.
And
For
then
him.
6 was like a big mass pickup.
Yeah, he
On
picked up
Sky-
a lot of mass on that one.
We don't know what Little Splitter would have done at 6, but it was weird because those both 3 to 4, again, Minnesota, different properties, different genetics, different nutrition. 3 to 4 was a minimal jump. So why? I don't know. Sample size could be, location could be, genetics could,
Well,
a lot of factors.
Little splitter. I didn't think he was going to score that as well as he did. You guys said he would, but he was 5.5.
Right. So what would his 6 jump be?
Yeah. What would it have been? What would
Probably
it
a
have
lot
been?
more substantial than
Might have been.
skyscraper.
I think that, in my opinion, it's a pretty simple thing, and I don't think you can quantify it as well. It's every deer is going to do the same thing. I think you guys are kind of getting to it in a roundabout way. Look at what humans do. Look at what us guys do going through adolescence and make jumps. Like, yeah, there's guys that mature in 8th grade. There's other guys that don't mature till they're 30.
Right.
They're still getting to that level of maturity. It's just that they do it at differences. So is that a difference in genetics? Is it what factors play into that? Who knows? But I think that's the same thing we're looking at. I don't think that you can look at a deer and say, well, from 4 to 5, they're going to make this jump, and then
They don't all do it.
they don't all do it. So I think you're onto something, and I think you're onto something.
your
in the
location.
same way.
It's just a matter of
probably-
what the offset years.
And once I've kind of absorbed this information, a lot of it's coming from JJ. I'm going to be honest with you because I'm running the business. I'm not out there studying the deer. And last year was really the first year when I kind of let the boys take over in the business. I was able to get back in my element and sit in an area. I was injured, so it was kind of a nice little deal. I could slide in and out, but I was literally studying the deer and the behavior, and I could watch all these things happen from a behavioral perspective, from the time of year pre-rut, into the rut, post-rut. And I'm not talking about just the bucks. I'm talking about the does, the fawns, all the behavior, the behavior socially. I watched it all unfold right in front of me the entire season, and it got me back in my element. And so the point of what I'm getting at is it's kind of come full circle for me why the age is more important than the score. Because I'm looking at something that's going to give me more fulfillment. And I know a 6.5-year-old deer and a 7.5-year-old deer is it's a tough deer to kill. It's a really tough deer to kill. And 5.5s aren't easy either. But when you can sit there and watch behavior and know that you could have shot a 2.5, a 3.5, and a 4.5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 times during the season because he was right there, that's not a challenge anymore for me. You know what I mean? And so that's why it's the age structure is what really gives me my fulfillment.
it becomes just as satisfying to have them walk by as it does.
It does,
to
yeah.
kill 'em,
Just
I mean. And
you
watching
learn
them
a lot.
and
Yeah,
learning.
learning, watching deer, seeing deer on the hoof right in front of you.
You know, this year was
the
tough
most
to find out when they
educated
were
thing.
going into estrus, and all of a sudden everybody goes, oh yeah, the bucks are chasing dozer and estrus. Well, not where I'm at. And then within literally 2 days, I watched this herd of does come in there, and I watched them change their demeanor, and I'm like, dude, she's coming in within a day. And the next day, I went out in the same blind, and she's running the fawns off. It's like, wow, it happened right there in front of me, you know? And so now I know it's happening here.
That
But
goes
they
back to
were
the priming thing.
You know, it's a weird deal. And then it all kicked in. The whole area just went nuts.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's, again, going back to this deal of being able to tell or not tell. It's a perfect example is a friend of ours shot it over there in Wisconsin at Homegrown, shot a 9.5-year-old deer this year. Okay.
Wow.
So, like, this was an
Crazy.
8-pointer.
That's a
They
feat.
don't live
And
that long.
And he was 140 some inches, a gorgeous buck. I mean, this deer is beautiful. But you walk up to him, and I was there when he recovered it. You walk up to this deer, and there is no way on this earth that I'm going to say, yeah, that one's 9.5, not knowing anything else about
Yeah,
him. Like,
no.
you can't. You can tell he's a mature buck. And I think it gets even muddier when you get like 5 into whatever range it is after that. Like, it's hard to say, okay, he's 5. Well, he's 6. He's 7. Like, what's the difference between a 7 and 8-year-old? Man, unless you have history, you're not going to tell.
You don't
9
know.
years old. Now, they had trail camera pictures of this deer dating back to, at least 2015. So they're saying 9.5. Again, there's probably a year fluctuation difference one way or the other, potentially. But, like, again, you walk up to a lot of these deer, especially when they get to that ultra mature level, like, there's a lot of unknown. And here's the hard part about it too. And this is more as an industry and hunters as a whole. What we've done is we've created the fish story, right? We've created this idea that
absolutely.
it was before it was, okay, you got to shoot a 115, you got to do this. Well, now we're at age and you have two ends of the spectrum. Now it's like, because we're getting to that where people are defining their goals differently, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But now what we've created is, and not we've created, but what we've gone away from is doing what you guys do. Analyzing every part of it, taking the data and making our decisions, and I'm just saying as a whole, people are making decisions not based off what that data is. Here, that's what we do. We can say that this deer's 6.5 because we have data to prove it. What guys are doing is they're holding a shed like that and they're going, well, and they're creating a fish story in their head. They're saying, well, no, because of genetics and because of that, this deer's only 2.5 because they want it to be 2.5. They're creating that vision in their mind. Or they're shooting a 3-year-old and saying, wow, no, this deer is actually 5.5.
We're justifying it.
It's all justification.
Justification,
But we've
absolutely.
created that. It's just like the score thing. And I don't
Because
say
they don't want to be shamed for shooting a 2.5, and that's
Yeah.
BS.
It's
You
all
want to kill
bullshit.
it. It's no different than like men are great about justifying anything they want. Like, honey, I need a tractor. I have to do these food plots. I have to have a tractor. This is justification. You don't have to have a tractor.
Let me
Nobody
go on.
has
I'm
to
going
do
to go
food
on
plots,
right
but-
now, and I've said this over and over and over. Okay, I'm coming out right now, and I'm just saying it to the world. If a deer, and I don't care if you've been hunting for 40 years, if a buck comes walking in or a doe comes walking in, and you're pumped up and your heart's beating, you grab that weapon and you pull back and you make the decision you're going to shoot that deer, and you go through that experience. That's exactly what you should be doing. Period. And nothing else matters.
And the shame is that these people, by doing that, like, you're giving hunters misinformation, you know? So like, you going out there and wishing that this deer, this shed that you're holding is 2.5 because you want the genetics to be there and he's in a certain spot, you know? And I'm not saying that everybody does this, but like, okay, so somebody else is looking at that and he's comparatively trying to learn something, and then he's looking at his deer and he's not learning the right things. You know, like, people are putting all this information out there and saying these things without real history behind it or any validity to it. And then somebody else is over there trying to learn, well, okay, well, I'd like to shoot a 5-year-old deer. What does that look like? And they have no freaking clue because they're seeing all this other crap out there that
their goals are out of this
people have no
world.
validity to. So when it comes down to it, again, it's really, really hard to say. You can make generalizations, but it's really hard without all of the big picture and all of the puzzle pieces and extensive trail cameras and history to say if a deer is this age or that age or that age. So it's like, you know, use reveals, put them out there and
Yes.
freaking get as much
I tell ya.
content as
Knowledge.
you can
It's all
year
about
after
knowledge.
year, and build that internally. You know, learn about it from firsthand experience. Sure, learn, you know, how a deer's face at 3 looks different from a deer's face at 5. Learn what their body looks like. Learn, okay, you know, if a deer's more massive, generally, you know, mass comes with age, but not always the case. So, you know, just take those things, learn the basics of it, and then try to create that history within your own stuff and property.
I've learned so much over the years from being open-minded, knowing myself that there's so much knowledge out there, and I will never have it all. I will never have it all.
It's
And
not
I'm not even
possible.
close to having half of it. And I understand that. And the best thing about understanding that is I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to prove. If I'm wrong about something tomorrow, I didn't say I knew everything. I didn't say I was right about everything. But the great thing about that is it leaves me open-minded, and it allows me to realize that I can learn from this guy with the years that he has, this guy, you, or I can learn from the kid that has 2 years on. Their 2 years of hunting might tell me something that I didn't know because he's done his homework on something else that I have.
Well,
there's so much.
It doesn't even have to be doing his homework, Dan, because
Experience.
this is the way I started my business. And I got this advice from a guy. He says, you know, Mike, he says, you need to take in as much information as you can, process it, and then just throw out the stuff that doesn't, you know, work for you or have validity for what you're trying to achieve or know or whatever. And I'll never forget that this kid who knew nothing, and I'm talking waterfowl days now, came up to me and he was talking, and he was talking about this and that. And he says, yeah, did you hear the duck talk? And when they go over, and he goes, does this noise like with his lips and his fingers. And I kind of chuckled, and his buddy just like punches him like, shut up, It's their wings making that noise, by the way. That's what I'm trying to get at. And he thought the ducks were talking. And I'll never forget that. But then we went on in the conversation, and he said something. He didn't realize that he was making a point, but I picked up on it. And it's something that really stuck with me when it came to my guiding service. And, it was a behavior thing. I can't remember exactly what it was because my brain's kind of deteriorated now. But taking in that information, no matter where it comes from or who it comes from, and like Dan says, having that open mind, that's everything. And if you're not doing that, well, you're not learning. And I add one more thing to that. What you used to be able to do back when I was into waterfowl, you can't do anymore. So the behavior of the animal changes, times change, the structure and the physique and the deer are so much bigger now than they were back in the day when I was in high school because of the food, the genetics, the management of land, all the different things. It's just things change, and they're going to continue to change. And if you think you know it all, you're actually the one that knows the least.
Here's the proof behind it. Mike, if I would have called you 15 years ago and said, hey, let's try something. Take a fan out and go turkey hunting and walk across the field with a fan in front of you, and that bird will come running out at you. You'd have said, you're an idiot. That'll never happen. That bird will run, cry crazy. Do you think a 50-year turkey hunting veteran came up with that idea? My guess, if I had to guess, it was probably a kid that had been doing it for 3 or 4 years and said, I'm going to try this. This will be fun.
Just
now
try
look
it.
at us. We're running out across the field with a turkey fan and waving it, and here comes the bird that locked up on the old timers for 50 years at 80 yards, and they couldn't kill him, and now it's going,
That happened.
That is
that
a
happened.
prime
in water,
example.
That happened in waterfowl. There's a guy, a great friend of mine. He's passed away now, sad to say, but came out with they called him Flagman, Randy Bartz. And if you're into waterfowl, you know this guy. You've heard of him, whatever. And he came out with this flagging system that he had seen that they had done on the East Coast. And so these guys on the East Coast are out there in these pits, and they got these black square flags, 2 of them, 1 in each hand, just like you're at a race. And all of a sudden they're just whipping them around, crossing them, whipping them around, and this and that. And if you would have told any waterfowl hunter in the world that you should jump out of your blind and start waving flags around to get the ducks and the geese to come to you, they would have said you are crazy. And it works. Now, it's been refined significantly since that, but that's the point.
I've also seen guys take green tarps on snowy fields and put a green tarp on a snowy field to make it look like open water to get
yeah.
birds to land.
I've
I'm
seen
like,
that years ago.
that that's stuff that somebody just thought of. And like I said, you never know.
Oh, I got a million stories of things that I've tried that didn't work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know a good buddy of mine. He actually, when I was hunting a Coffman buck, he came up with this idea. And I won't lie, I never came up with the nerve to do it. I was scared to death to do it. I never did it. And he said, have you ever thought about just trying to bump him out of his bed and then hanging a stand? And I'm like, no, and I'm not going to. And I didn't, because I was scared to death. I won't lie. I never had the kahunas to do it. This guy, I know for a fact, and he's a well-known guy in the area. He hunts big deer, and he's a good, honest guy. I know him. He had 190, almost 200-inch deer that it was bedded out in a field, and there was like 3 or 4 trees out in this field, and he knew it was bedded out there, but he just didn't know exactly where, and it was a kind of a taller CRP field. He decided that he was going to go out there one day, midday, bump that deer, find out exactly where its bed was, hang a stand close enough to shoot it when it came back from its bed, and then he put a camera in there too, and then he gave it 4 or 5 days and went in there at 4 o'clock in the morning and sat on that stand and waited till daylight and shot that deer. Now,
and
that's thinking outside the box.
I know, but that goes back to the point when we're getting a little away from aging, but it's the fulfillment of the interaction and the challenge And these little things that we're talking about where age comes into play, I think that, that's really what the core of what we're after. JJ, you had a point before we started going off ADD here.
Yeah, I kind of probably lost that
More
point.
Adderall.
Yeah, no, I mean, just looking back at all the different people we work with at the Deer Society, we know outside of Deer Society, everybody has a lot of successful hunters, all have different tactics. And you can, like Dan said, you can pretty much learn from all of them because they're all successful and they all do it in their own way. So just, at that point, just keep learning. And
Am I allowed to tell a short story about Eminem? That's a
How
very
short are we
good.
talking here?
That's a very good age structure story, I think.
We are running out of time, but yes, you can. And this is, and I'm glad you talked about this. So just to intro this is stemming from this giant set right here, the Coffman buck on the table. Like, hold on and listen to this one.
Can I grab that antler real quick? I want to show a couple things here.
We're talking about genetics.
Here's
of
what
this
I want
buck.
to show, and I think maybe we might show some pictures that we'll see. So if you look at this deer, what I want you to notice is this tine right here on the left side. It's a third main beam. My index finger's pointing at it right here. Okay, it comes out of the beam. It's a third main beam, and you see how it splits right here. It splits there. It splits there. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is this tine right here, the G2 that I'm pointing out with his brow, that has a kicker off the top of it. So then another thing I want you to also look at is looking at this deer. You see on the left side of his main frame, he's very tall. He's a lot taller than his right side. And he's also got less tines, right? Now on the right side, he's shorter with more tines, right? So I want you to really visualize that and think about that. And maybe you'll see some pictures of the buck I'm about ready to talk about. So I have this buck. I named him Eminem. And the reason I named him Eminem is he showed up in 2019. And when he showed up, he was, I would have guessed him at 2.5 years old. Now, like we said before, he could have been 2, he could have been 3. I don't know. But he was very little. We're allowed to feed in Ohio, and I use feeders, and I put the ports at 41 inches. And most deer can eat out of that very easily. He could barely reach the ports. You could see every bone up here in him. He was at most a 2.5-year-old deer, in my personal opinion. He was a 7x7, small frame. Got pictures of him. You'll hopefully be able to see him. And you could just tell that the rack did not fit him at all. So I looked at this deer and I actually called the neighbors and I said, listen, this buck's young and he is a mega giant. I actually named him Eminem for Mini Monster. Mini Monster is what I named him that year. I had no clue what he was going to do next year. I knew he was going to be big. Well, the next year, I get him. I didn't get his sheds. He shed on another property, and I think one of them were found. The next year, he comes back. When he came back, I didn't even realize it was him at first. It took a couple months of or antler pictures, velvet pictures, and this deer was a giant. Now, when I was looking at him, his body was still smaller, 3.5-year-old deer probably, tops 4. But he had 26, 27 points. He had a third main beam on his left side. He had a kicker coming off his right G2. He was taller on the left side. He looked very, very, very similar to Coffman buck, and I think you'll see that. Keep in mind, this property is only 3 to 5 miles from a bird's, from the sky. It could very easily 5 years later be the Coffman buck Jr., and I truly believe that it is an offspring of the Coffman buck. First buck I've seen like this. So either way, this deer, I know he's young. And I tell my wife about him. I show him pictures. I'm excited. And he's daylighting every single day. The deer's walking into a feeder in the broad daylight. He's walking into minnow every day. And I'm just astonished by it. I'm like, holy crap, I have never seen a deer that size. We talk about feeding, but we know 5, 6-year-old deer do not walk into feeders, and they don't do it in the daylight, very seldom. So this deer's even acting like a 3.5-year-old deer. And I decide for myself, I thought he was 175 inches. And don't get me wrong, I would be ecstatic to kill a 175-inch deer anytime. And it'll be that way for a long time, I'm sure, if not forever. But either way, I tell my wife, babe, I can't hunt him. And she's like, why not? I said, it goes against everything that I've done over the years. I've spent all this time, energy, money, everything into managing land and trying to get monster bucks. I know this deer has the opportunity to be every bit of 230, 240, 250, upwards of a world record deer. I want to see him grow. And she says, you're crazy. She's like, everything we put into this, and I'm just like any other guy out there. My wife lets me know every dime I spend in hunting and lets me know when I've spent too much. And she knows what it means to me. But the last thing she wants to see me do is pass a deer that's that size and what it was. I wouldn't hunt it. I ended up going to Indiana that year, first couple weeks of season, and she was about half mad that I was hunting this deer. So I told her, I said, well, you know what? I got a fix for this. I said, truly, I don't know if I would feel that great of an inspiration for killing it. I said, but be the biggest deer you ever killed. And if you did it on your own, I said, I'd be ecstatic and it'd still be hanging on our wall. She said, I'll hunt him. And I said, well, get out there and do it. I'll be in Indiana. She hunted him the whole week I was in Indiana. He came in within 80 yards from her twice. Little did she know, but I found out through trail cameras later. I got home. She was still upset I wouldn't hunt him. She said, somebody else is going to kill that deer. I cannot believe you're not going to hunt it. And I've always said, if you kill that 3.5-year-old because you're afraid your neighbor's going to kill it, you're now your neighbor.
Exactly.
And that's my motto. And don't get me wrong, like we've said it before, if that 3.5-year-old's what excites you, shoot it. When people come hunt with me, knowing that I manage land, the first thing they always ask me, what's your size regulations? What do you have deer that and I look at them and I say, listen to me. I got a couple of rules here. First of all, if you shoot a buck on my property, you better be excited about it. Don't shoot a young buck and then when I get there say, well, I thought he was bigger. I wish I wouldn't have shot him. If you have to, act excited. I said, because to me, I said, the last thing I want to see is you did something that because you thought you were only going to be here for a week or whatever. And my second rule is if you kill a buck on my property, then you owe it to me and that deer to spend the money to mount it and put it on your wall and properly show that deer like you're proud of it. Don't come out here and kill something just to kill something. Other than that, if it's a 6-point that's a year-old deer that excites you and makes that happen, I'm going to be just as happy for you. I won't say a word. If it's a 3-year-old that deer, you know, more than likely I wouldn't have put him on it. But I'm going to be honest. But if that's what excited them, that's what I want to see, you know. So either way, with that being said, my wife's just at it, and it's the biggest deer I have by far. It is obviously the biggest deer.
So basically what you're saying is you're kind of buying into that age structure as much as
Absolutely.
as much as
100%.
The scoring. And that I think that's kind of where we are. And I think with that story, it tells the progression of everybody. You know, we all started out, you know, my first buck was a 1.5-year-old buck. You know, we all started, well, my first deer was that was my first deer. And then my second deer was with a bow, and that was a doe. And I was more excited over the doe than the buck because the sound of that arrow and watching it fly. But we all progress. And now you look at what we do and people think we're, you know, I don't know, farming deer or whatever. You can call it whatever you want. We're managing. And the reason we see deer and the reason we have deer is because of what we do, not because of anything else. Anybody can do what we're doing, and we want to share that information. And if that's the way you want to go, that's great. And this aging thing, you know, gosh, man, get off the shaming thing. Get off the shaming and just really learn how to age deer. And if you shoot 130 inch and it's 4.5, 5.5, 6.5 years old, that what will mean more to you than shooting a 145 at 3.5 or 2.5 that you know could have been, you know, 190 as you progress through that mode. You know, that'll start to happen to you. It just will.
Yes. But and to finish it off, I ended up buying into it, and I told my wife, I said, here's the deal. I said, I will go out and sit in the stand and hunt that deer. I said, but here's what I'm going to tell you right now. If that deer walks up and I'm second guessing it, I will not shoot it. I said, if I know, I will know immediately. If that deer walks up and I'm shaking out of my boots and it got me excited, by all means, he's going on the wall if I can make it happen. But if not, I decided that I'm not going to shoot a deer just to shoot it.
Well, the other
So-
thing that people
Don't ruin the hunt breakdown, Dan.
yeah, the other thing
I
that
don't
people
know if we
don't
were going to use it. We didn't know.
No, I'm just kidding.
well that people don't talk about near enough is okay. So you let this big genetic wonderful deer go and somebody else shoots it. Well, maybe it goes another year, 2 years, 3 years. Look at how many genes you're spreading out there.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, there's something to be said for that, giving them that extra year, because if they can get to that 5 year, they're going to be breeding a lot more does than they were at 3.5. I promise you that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, 100%. I mean, it's up to you guys. If you want me to finish it, or whatever you guys want to do. I mean,
You're going to leave them hanging, JJ.
we talked about a hunt breakdown, but
We'll
we
leave that
also
one hanging.
talked-
It's got a pretty cool twist to the story.
Yeah.
Some pretty good educational
To
points.
be
And
continued.
Yeah, I think that's a
And-
good way of leaving it hanging
Yeah.
too. I mean, I think you're right.
some footage some good footage.
Well, no, I think that's a good way to leave it hanging, and we're running out of time here, so we're gonna wrap it. But some really cool sheds, deer here, antlers, all of the above. Some outliers, some ones that just tell the story of look, make your decisions based on history and proof and what you got going. It's really hard to exactly age a deer based on very little information. There's lots of things to look at. There's lots of information to take in. The more information you have, the more accurate, decision you can make on how old a deer is. But when it comes down to it, age just like score is a number. And that's all it is. You're happy with something. Be proud of the deer, the story, and everything that you have into it. That's what makes hunting fun. That's why we do what we do. So I'm going to wrap this up unless you got one more thing.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sure we're going to be adding more detailed information on how we're aging our deer, which can be helpful with people as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. So keep an eye out on Deer Society YouTube and on the app. If you haven't downloaded the app on the Apple iTunes Store or Google Play, make sure you do that. It's free. Lots of information. Maybe we'll have to do a video showing some of these bucks, showing this Andre the Giant, some stuff around the Coffman buck, and obviously mini monster hunt breakdown coming soon. You have to check out that ending coming up here in a few months. So thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Appreciate it.
Well,